This is the Germans from Russia Experience, Episode 17, Murder Mystery near Fresno's Rooshian Town in 1896, Part 5. Welcome to the Germans from Russia Experience. I am the creator and your host, Elisa Rodriguez, and I am here to inspire you and others to learn anything and everything about your own family heritage by providing information, experiences, and stories about a special group of people, the Germans from Russia. Hi there. Today, I will begin by answering a few of my own questions that came to mind as I read articles in episode 16. I questioned the fact in the newspaper that said Albert Brandenburg was a German from Russia. And yes, I did find records that indicate he and his wife, Mary Louise Eselgroth, were both born in Switzerland and were German. Albert was baptized in Germany. They were married in Germany, and Albert and Louise, as she was most often referred to, boarded a ship in Belgium and arrived in New Orleans, Louisiana on November 7th, 1887. Then somehow made their way to Fresno. At the time, they had one son, Albert Jr., who was 3 months old. I did not find Albert Jr. in the 1900 census, along with his parents, so he must have died before the age of 13. The Brandenburgs were naturalized in Fresno County in 1892. It was customary for the wife to be naturalized along with her husband until 1922, when the Married Women's Citizenship Act, or the Cable Act, was enacted in the United States. And then women were able to apply on their own to become citizens. Okay, so I went back to look for some more research documents that would give me information on when Stephen returned to the United States with his 3 children, if that was the case. I am not able to find any such information. I can only find Stephen's naturalization application from October 18, 1875, and an application for a passport to travel back to Armenia on May 29, 1876. Now, this certainly does not mean that it does not exist. It is very possible that these documents have been digitized even. However, Ancestry has not located them for me in hints. It seems that Queen was already born before he went back, perhaps living in Armenia with her mother as Stephen came to California for the first time. Then Benjamin was born in 1879, and that is a few years after Stephen returned to Armenia. I have no further information on the daughter Esther. All we know is that she was in an asylum in Stockton, California. I found no birth or death or any records have been found for her, except information from the newspaper that just names her and says she's in a Stockton asylum. I tried to do some research on that. I guess, there were no censuses for people in the asylum maybe, or maybe they were separate records. This is not something that I have been able to fully research or know about. Also, there's been no obituary or anything like that had her name on it. So, don't know anything else about Esther. A few episodes ago, I had found what I hoped was a major clue in this murder mystery. But no newspapers so far have mentioned or even considered this connection that I found. The man who was leasing the Mukes vineyard was named K.M. Nishkin. Now, Daniel's sister, and Daniel was the accused, originally accused of this crime, his sister, who was known as Armin, had married a Kalem H. Nishkin. As soon as I realized this, I felt like these 2 Nishkins were connected and probably related, like maybe brothers. However, I have not been able to find out their connection until I recently visited the cemetery again. I went to the Ararat Cemetery, that's the Armenian section of Mountain View Cemetery, and I located a large group of Nishkin graves. I will post photos on my Facebook page. The main family headstone is a very large, probably almost 8 to 10 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And it says, of course, Nishkin on one side, and on the other side it's written in the Armenian language. And several of the graves have names written on Armenian writing only. The dates are there, but the names are written in the Armenian writing, like about 10 of them. I took photos of all of the other Nishkins in this location. Armin and Kalem are there together, and their headstones are raised up, standing up, along with photos of each of them. They have those little plaque photos on there. Again, Armin is the sister of Daniel and Elijah, who both are buried a few hundred feet from here near Stephen, Queen, and Benjamin. And in that line of Nishkin graves, I found a K.M. Nishkin, same initials as the person who was leasing the land on which the Shahamarians were killed. The name is Carnegie M. Nishkin, and the dates are 1868 to 1953. So this could be the man who leased the land and also related to the brother-in-law of Daniel's sister. Family connections for sure. One of the reasons I have continued to do research on this family is that I wonder if living descendants are aware of this tragic story. It is almost certain that Esther had no children, and also that Queen and Benjamin had no children, as none has been mentioned in any documents I have located so far. I have also discovered that Daniel and Elijah were both never married, and they did not have any children that have been documented. So that led me to their sisters to discover if their families grew with children and grandchildren, and they did. So before I mentioned that Daniel and Elijah had an older sister. They called her the oldest daughter in the mother's obituary. And she was the daughter of Hagop, or Jacob, and Nazik, who were also the parents of Daniel and Elijah. I was not able to find her name anywhere, her first name, but she was called Mrs. B.H. Paul. And B.H. Paul was Basil H. Paul, who was also Armenian. There are tons of news articles about him buying up land all over the Fresno area and being involved in the Farm Bureau. Also that he invented some kind of raisin seed or raisin stem removal machine. I found lots and lots of articles about him. So it sounds like he was a pretty successful farmer. They had 2 sons. Edward, who lived from 1892 to 1986, and Irvin. No info found yet on him or any descendants thereafter. The younger daughter, Armin, who was married to Kalem H. Nishkin, had 2 daughters. Naoma, who was born in 1909 and passed in 1984, and Doris, 1911 to 1976. Naoma married Surin Soroyan and had 2 daughters, Betty Lou, born in 1943 and passed in 1991. And I won't say the name of the other daughter since she may still be alive. Married a man named Rodrigo. Again, I won't say his first name. They had 3 sons, and I will also not give their names as they may still be living. Doris married a man named James Dunn, and they had 2 sons, who I will also not name. It is a good practice in genealogy research and reporting to not name living people unless they give their consent. Now, it is true that these names are public, as I found these names in newspaper articles such as obituaries. And yes, you can look them up too, but I will not until such time as I have asked them if their names could be included, and I have yet to reach out or get consent for this. All right, back to newspaper articles. So, this murder occurred on the night of the June 5th and the morning of June 6th, and we are now in newspapers at June 9th. My first article is a short one. The Oakland Times from Oakland, California. Murderer unknown. Fresno, June 8th. The mystery of the triple murder of the Shahamarian family is in deep today as ever. The authorities have released Daniel Shahamarian, the nephew who was at first supposed to be the criminal, because there is no evidence against him. The police are convinced that the members of the Russian colony near here are responsible for the crime. Okay, so they're going back to pointing at the Russians. Okay, in the Fresno Morning Republican on Tuesday, June 9th, we have a little blurb that says letters of administration were yesterday granted to L.H. Church, the public administrator in the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, who died June 5th. The estate is valued at $1,800. So I guess that's like a legal notice that lets the public know that there's going to be a probate of some kind. So that's what that one is. All right, on to the next one. Fresno Morning Republican, Tuesday, June 9th. The triple murder. No clue as to the perpetrator. Russians are suspected. Interviews with Albert Brandenburg and Reverend Legler concerning the matter. Mystery still baffles authorities in the triple murder of the Armenian family. Officers and newspapermen have been exceptionally diligent in research for the clue, but they have not as yet found a definite one. The theory that it was done by Russians continues to be the only one, yet it has not been accepted. A Republican reporter yesterday paid a visit to the house of Albert Brandenburg, the German whose wife and little daughter had been insulted by Benjamin Shahamarian, the murdered youth. Mr. Brandenburg lives in Rooshian Town, just across the road from the house of the dead Shahamarian family. Mrs. Brandenburg did most of the talking to the interpreter who accompanied the reporter. Brandenburg was willing to talk, but his wife was more willing. Both appeared to tell everything they knew and seemed as much mystified as anyone as to who perpetrated the murder. The Brandenburgs said that they have lived neighbors to the Shahamarians for 6 or 7 years, and their relations have always been happy. Only a few days before the murder, Queen Shahamarian, the daughter, came over to Mrs. Brandenburg's and asked her to assist in making a dress. Only recently had they become unfriendly to the Shahamarian boy. On the night of the murder, Mr. Brandenburg went to bed about 8 o'clock with the children. In this statement, he was borne out by the statement of his wife. She went to bed about 9 o'clock. A week from last Saturday, Brandenburg returned from Hollister, where he had been working. He made the trip on foot and had a very hard time of it. He exhibited a number of blisters on the bottom of his feet, which have not yet healed. And that's just amazing to me. Are they talking about Hollister over on the coast? How could someone even possibly walk from there? I mean, maybe he got some buggy rides on the way if he was on roads, but how is that even possible? I don't know. When about 30 miles from Fresno, he says he gave out. He could not get his swollen feet into his shoes and had to walk barefooted a considerable distance in the burning sand. At a very opportune time, a wagon came along and he was given a ride. When seen yesterday, he was still suffering from the effects of the hard journey. He has not been able to work since he returned and has been resting about home. This accounts from Brandenburg going to bed at 8 o'clock last Friday evening. He and his wife were up at 6 the next morning. Brandenburg stated that he still goes to bed very early as he is suffering from the fatigue of his journey. When asked if he had any firearms in the house, he answered no. His wife substantiated this statement, and judging from her manner, she was telling the truth. In fact, neither she nor her husband seem to be aware that suspicion has pointed to him as one who possibly knows the guilty parties. Neither Mr. nor Mrs. Brandenburg heard any noises from the Shahamarian cottage during the night. On the evening before they had seen the Shahamarian family and young Benjamin Shahamarian sitting on the front porch of the cottage. Queen Shahamarian had been a frequent visitor to the Brandenburg house. She had told the Brandenburgs that she had been engaged to young Shahamarian, but her father objected on the grounds of the relationship, they being cousins. Shahamarian continued to visit his uncle's house, and the attachment between him and Queen did not cease. The Brandenburgs say that they have often heard a noise from the Shahamarian house. The children and father would frequently have fights, all being mentally unbalanced. Well, that's new. We haven't heard anything like that before. Especially when alone, Queen, the girl, seemed to suffer most, and she would stand at the windows and go through strange antics. What could that possibly mean? Like screaming and waving her arms, even though they know no one's there? As to the relationship with old man Shahamarian, Mr. and Mrs. Brandenburg say he has been very neighborly during their entire residence there. They would borrow and lend articles to each other quite frequently, which the youth had offered her during Friday afternoon. At this point, Brandenburg laughed and did not show any evidence of the anger which would have prompted a man to murder. Mrs. Brandenburg had gone before Justice Austin and swore to a complaint against Benjamin Shahamarian for assaulting her girl. But as the only evidence against him were the statements of two little girls, and as the boy flatly denied his guilt, the court had to discharge him. A warrant was then issued for his arrest on a charge of indecent exposure. It had been reported to the authorities that the youth had been guilty of several offenses. Upon investigation by Deputy Constable Pickford, no conclusive evidence could be obtained, and this case was also dismissed. Brandenburg stated that when he returned home and was appraised of young Shahamarian's doings, he decided upon renewing the case in court. It was the proper manner to have the boy punished, he said. Mr. and Mrs. Brandenburg denied any knowledge of any meetings held in Rooshian Town to decide upon what disposition should be made of the youth. The meeting held in the church on Friday night, which was reported to be a gathering of Russians to consider Benjamin Shahamarian's actions, was a religious affair, according to the statement of the Russians. These meetings are similar to prayer meetings and are held almost nightly. Mr. Brandenburg is a teacher of the Sunday school of the church. When asked their opinion as to who was the perpetrator of the triple murder, both Mr. and Mrs. Brandenburg shrugged their shoulders and replied that they did not know. The only enemies of the Armenian family, to their knowledge, were two Armenians. One had a difficulty with the elder Shahamarian over a goat, and the other, whose name is Peters, had trouble over some business matters. Peters and Shahamarian had come to blows. These occurrences happened nearly a year ago and could not possibly have any bearing on the present murder. Pastor Legler of the Russian church was also interviewed. He became considerably excited as the press representative came up. He refused to make a statement, saying that whenever he was wanted at the courthouse, he would tell what he knew. He did not know anything, he said, except the rumors that were afloat. He seemed to be much worked up because Russians had been suspected of the murder. At his prayer meetings, nothing earthly was spoken of, much less Benjamin Shahamarian and the inability of the courts to punish him. As to who the perpetrator of the murder was, Reverend Legler said he had not the slightest idea. He was positive, however, that it was not committed by any Russian or Russians. The Russians in general say that the murder must have been the work of Armenian enemies, while the Armenians think that the assassin can be found among the Russians. A few months ago, the elder Shahamarian had trouble with a Russian named Huber. Huber chased him with an axe, and Shahamarian took refuge in his house. Every little circumstance which might lead to the detection of the murderer is being gathered, but up to yesterday, the authorities have arrived at no conclusion. They are not centering their efforts on any definite line. They are all inclined, however, to place some faith in the Russian theory. The funeral of the dead family was held Sunday afternoon from Smith and McMaster's undertaking parlors. Reverend D.H. Gillian conducted the services. There was a large attendance of Armenians. On Sunday, District Attorney Snow visited the Chinese camp, which is located near the scene of the tragedy. The Chinamen said that they heard the pistol shots late on Friday night. They were preceded by screaming. The favorite theory advanced regarding the manner in which the victims were lured to death is that the assassin called the family out by telling them that someone was drowning at the angle of the canal near which the bodies were found. It has now been learned that the murdered family had retired before being called out. The bedclothes were displaced, and the garb of the victims was incomplete, showing that they had put them on hastily. This is particularly so with the woman. Her shoes were unbuttoned. Okay, that was the end of the Fresno Morning Republican article from June 9th. Now we're going to June 10th, which is the Wednesday, and I think the inquest is supposed to be on Thursday, so we haven't even had the full inquest yet. But this is the Expositor, also Fresno newspaper. Still a mystery. The Shahamarian murderer eludes detection. Suspected Russians declare that the Armenians are responsible for the drowning of a little boy. Sheriff Scott and his deputies, District Attorney Snow, and all of the constables of the township are still diligently seeking for a murderer of the Shahamarian family. Each day they gain reliable information, but as yet do not feel justified in making arrests. A Russian woman named Wills, who lives near the Shahamarian place, has informed the officers that she has learned that Benjamin Shahamarian, the unfortunate lad whose lascivious proclivities are supposed to be responsible for the slaughter not only of himself but his father and his sister, was not at home at supper time on the night of the triple murder. She further asserts that on the sanguinary evening she saw Daniel Shahamarian, nephew of old Stephen Shahamarian, accompanied by the latter and his ill-fated daughter, drove off toward the scene of the crime, ostensibly in search of the missing Benjamin. Mrs. Willa's story is not given credence. It is thought that she is one of a coterie of Muscovites who are preparing in advance a theory of defense for any Russian who may be charged with the crime. In the Russian colony, the excitement engendered by the intimation that some of its residents are guilty of the murder of the Shahamarians still prevails. The former subjects of the Little Father stoutly deny that Armenian blood has stained the hands of any of the residents in the colony. Strangely enough, however, they declare that they have ample cause to declare vendetta against the swarthy men of Armenia. They assert that the latter wantonly did to death the little Russian boy who was a few months ago found drowned in a slough a few miles from Fresno. The Armenians deride this accusation. So it seems that a boy from the Rooshian Town drowned in a canal a few months before this incident, and now the Russians are saying the Armenians must have done it. Interesting. But then you would think that that would make it more so that the Russians were getting back at the Armenians by killing this family. But I do not understand. All right, continuing. We have the San Francisco Examiner, and this is also June 9th. Fresno's mystery yields no clues. Each day makes manifest the theory of vengeance visited. The Russian minister takes steps to exculpate himself of the crime. His son is under the law's eye. No tangible evidence against him, save that he has cause to hate the Shahamarians. Fresno, June 8th. The Russians are my enemies, but I don't think they will go so far as to take my life. Thus spoke old Stephen Shahamarian to his brother 24 hours before his corpse was found lying beside the bodies of his son and daughter on a lonely spot in a vineyard a mile distance from his home. Could that really be true? Or is his brother just saying that to point fingers at someone? Wow. Sheriff Scott has spent 3 days in a vain endeavor to ascertain if these words were indicative of the motive that prompted the triple murder. Patient search has brought to light a few circumstances, revile in themselves, but sufficiently strong when considered as a whole, to make almost a certainty of the conclusion that here is a terrible example of a cruel form of Oriental vengeance, a vengeance that is not satisfied as long as there is a living member of the family of one who has transgressed the unwritten law. Shahamarian, the Armenian, was killed because he was the father of an offending man. Queen Shahamarian, the daughter, was slain because in her veins coursed the same blood that gave lift to Benjamin Shahamarian, the son, who forfeited his life because of his acts towards members of the Russian colony. So much is certain, yet the knowledge of these facts only serves to throw high lights on the deed and the motive, leaving the self-appointed executioners and the methods by which they accomplish the bloody deed so deep as to be impenetrable. While the officers of the law are bewailing their inability to grapple with the mysteries of the Old World feud, an unnatural placidity marks the course of events in the Armenian and Russian colony, a placidity that is manifestly only surface deep, yet is so doggedly maintained that all efforts to ruffle it prove utter failures. Russian and Armenians alike affect an unconcerning as to the success or failure of the efforts of the local constabulary to apprehend the murderer or murderers of the Shahamarians, father, son, and daughter. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, they take as an utterance that may apply to this social wrongs. Strange as it may seem, the one man in this colony of foreigners who displays a willingness to answer questions concerning the circumstances surrounding the murder is one against whom the finger of suspicion was first pointed. He is the Reverend Jacob Legler, the pastor of the church at which the members of the colony worship. He is a Russian, the father of one of the little girls for whose cause the killing is supposed to have been done, and the nearest neighbor to the ill-fated Shahamarian family. It was to his family and that of his next-door neighbor, a man named Brandenburg, that the old Armenian referred when he spoke to his brother about the hatred of the Russians. Though his priestly office has not sufficed to keep his name from being connected with this vineyard tragedy, there are few who are willing to say they believe he was a participant in the crime. They point to the fact that he is a man of middle age and that he has a son 22 years old who would not follow his father to take from his young shoulders the duty of redressing the family wrongs. This son, named Jacob, after his reverend father, when he heard of the wrong done his little sister, threatened to mete out proper punishment to the offender when a convenient opportunity presented itself. In the adjoining house, Mrs. Brandenburg, wrathful because she had been informed that the law was powerless to punish the man who had violated her little daughter, swore to the neighbors that as soon as her husband came from Hollister, young Shahamarian would pay for his acts with his life. Brandenburg has been home a week, and young Shahamarian has been dead 3 days. The Reverend Mr. Legler, who though a Russian, claims for his friends a majority of the Armenian residents of the colony, combines in himself all those traits of character that are the hallmarks of his race: slow to love and quick to hate, suspicious, tenacious of purpose, and filled with the religious fervor that brooks of no deviation from the path of an upright life. He is a man who is a power in the community in which he lives, and who guides the social as well as the spiritual affairs of his uneducated parishioners. Uneducated? What the heck? Coming from such a man, the condemnation of such an act as to committed by young Shahamarian would be taken by some of his followers as a license to slay. He admits having openly expressed his opinion as to what should be the punishment accorded to the violator of childish innocence, but declares himself guiltless of the terrible retribution so speedily worked out. Today, the preacher consulted an attorney by way of preparing himself against the possible event of his arrest on suspicion. He declared his ability to prove a complete alibi, but admitted that he was not prepared to say the same for his son. He said he had no knowledge of the whereabouts of his son on the fatal Friday night, though he was firmly convinced that the young man had a hand in the bloody work. The minister also admitted that he knew there was a meeting of some of his parishioners on Friday evening, but declared that he was not present. The meeting to which the Reverend Mr. Legler referred was held in the living rooms at the back of the small grocery store conducted by Conrad Metzler, a young Russian on the outskirts of the colony. Metzler and others say the meeting was of a purely religious character, and that, as has been asserted by others, the proper method of meting out punishment to the Shahamarian family was not discussed. Young Legler admits to having been at the Metzler's place as late as 8:30 o'clock Friday evening, but says he did not take part in the meetings. He went instead to the house of an acquaintance further up the street and remained until about 9 o'clock, when he went home. He says there were 2 women visitors at his father's house when he got there, but he told them he was very tired and went directly to bed. This statement, which is in direct conflict to that made by his father, is taken as one of the significant features of the case. So the Reverend says he didn't know where his son was, but the son says he came home and saw his dad and 2 other women in their house. Interesting. Not the least mysterious of the many unsolved mysteries of the case is how the murderer or murderers succeeded in taking the victims to the spot where the killing was done without attracting attention to themselves. By dint of much patient labor, the sheriff and his deputies have succeeded in proving to a reasonable certainty that the father, son, and daughter, together with those who accompanied them, went to the vineyard by way of the road. By taking this course, they traveled 1.5 miles, while the distance across the field is only 1 mile. Having arrived at this conclusion, there is an end of even reasonable surmise. In the whole field of conjecture, there is no plausible theory to account for the presence of this family at this lonely and unfrequented spot at the late hour of the night. The place is on the road of no house, and is only to be reached by cutting across lots. It is not probable that a family could be decoyed to this desolate spot at a late hour of the night by any tale that could be invented. It is equally improbable that they were taken there in duress, because they would have to pass for 1.5 miles along the road that is a public highway, and past many houses where lived people who would immediately have responded to a call for help. Yet their lifeless bodies are proof positive that they were there, and the blood that stained the freshly plowed ground attests the fact that they were alive when they reached there. The inanimate bodies are the effect, but the person has not yet been found whose mind is sufficiently subtle to reason back to the cause. Stephen Shahamarian was known in the Russian Armenian colony as a man who was without friends. His was an imperious character. And because of him being the possessor of a very comfortable property for one of his stations in life, he aspired to be a leader among those of his own nationality. His efforts in this line were resented by his fellow countrymen, not because they did not think him capable of performing the duties of dictator, but because he had left the realm of the Sultan to escape the very condition he would impose on them. This being so, they continued to respect him as a man who did honor to the colony, but withheld from him the friendship they accorded to others. Now that he is supposed to have fallen a victim to the vengeance of persons of another nationality, there is none to be found who expresses an opinion as to whether or not his fate was deserved. In the land from which they came, the private wrongs of Armenians are wiped out by private means. Okay, I still have 2 more articles for June 9th, so I'm going to go ahead and read those to you, and then we will end this episode. It looks like we'll have a part 6 and possibly a part 7, because I would like to tell you later what I think of all this and what I think happened. This printing of the San Francisco Chronicle from June 9th is, the printing is kind of bad, so I will do my best. Surrounded by mystery, no light on the tragedy at Fresno. Russians still suspected. Their pastor indignantly denies their guilt. Theories advanced by a neighbor of the murdered Armenians. Special dispatch to the Chronicle. Fresno, June 8th. It has at last dawned on the Russians who live in the south end of Fresno that public opinion lies in their door the murder of the Shahamarian family, and they have put on a defiant, careless air and refuse to talk, although they are not proof against flank movements of reporters, and a little strategy suffices to break their silence. Reverend Legler this afternoon, when approached on the subject, said he would say nothing, and it was no use to ask him. When informed that Russians were accused of the murder, he became excited, and smiling his breast with one hand, maybe it's smiting? Yeah, the print is not great, guys. And smiting his breast with one hand and pointing to the sky with the other, he called his Maker to bear witness to that no Russian ever harbored thoughts of murder, but would let the law take its course in all cases. When asked what was said and done at the meeting held the night in Rooshian Town, he said they met to worship God, and thoughts of no earthly things, much less murder, were allowed to enter the sacred premises of their house of worship. He admitted, however, that he was not at the meeting, but was detained at the house of a neighbor late that evening. Albert Brandenburg is one of Reverend Legler's near neighbors. A little girl of Brandenburg's and a girl of Reverend Legler's were the children said to have been assaulted by young Shahamarian. A reporter visited the Brandenburg home, but the inmates had nothing to say. A question or two, however, got them started, and they asked for an hour. Reverend Legler approached and stood near the corner of the house to hear what was said. Brandenburg cannot speak English, but can speak German, which is interesting. They keep calling them Russians, but they know they speak German because they have to have interpreters to talk to them. He made light of the murder and seemed to think it was nothing unusual, and took pains to state that he is a Sunday school teacher and would not think of taking the law into his own hands. I walked all the way from Hollister, said he, and my feet were so sore last Friday night I could not put my shoes on and had to limp around. I had no pistol and went to bed at 8 o'clock. My wife told me what had happened to our little girl, but I was willing to let the law take its course. Here, Mrs. Brandenburg spoke up in broken English and in great earnestness said, "When the officer came down here a week ago and told him what had happened, he said if anybody would treat his girl that way, he would kill him. The officer said he would see about it and went over to Shahamarian's house and stayed about half an hour. When he went by my house, I saw him laughing. I guess he had been bought with money and would not do anything. He told me he would come back in about a week and would see about it." So is she saying that she thinks the Shahamarians paid the officer off? It sounds like what she's saying. Here she paused long enough in her tirade against the officer for not doing his duty to claim an alibi for her husband on the night of the murder. She said he was tired and lame and went to bed about 8 o'clock. Next, she volunteered a theory to account for the murder by saying that she saw Daniel Shahamarian sitting on the steps of the Shahamarian porch that evening about 7 o'clock. She said this young man, had wanted to marry Miss Shahamarian, but her father had objected and he had to give it up. When asked her for her opinion as to how the ill-fated family had been decoyed so far from home into the vineyard, she advanced the theory that young Shahamarian had been working in that vineyard several days and maybe had not come home, and the other members of the family had gone out to see what was the matter. She said she had not seen this young man at home that evening, but had seen other members of the family. The Brandenburgs said Shahamarians lived on opposite sides of the road and could see into each other's houses. Mrs. Brandenburg is the only person so far who has stated that young Shahamarian was at work in the vineyard where his body was found. If this was a fact, it can be easily confirmed and possibly may furnish a clue for investigation on new lines. It is not believed to have been the case. It was stated at the inquest that none of the Shahamarian family had any occasion to be in that vineyard, so far as was known. Now, I did uncover that the person who was leasing the land or farming the land was a Nishkin, and Daniel's sister was married to Nishkin. So that could be his, sister's family's land that they were working, and he very well could have been working there. Also, that could have been a reason for them to go there if that, was a family connection. How Mrs. Brandenburg comes to have this information when none of the neighbors knew anything of it has not been explained. She says no light was lit in Shahamarian's house on the night of the murder. This, however, was not unusual, as they were accustomed to go to bed at dusk these long days. She reverted again and again to the subject of young Shahamarian and of the trouble he was in, and again spoke of the officer who had said the young man needed killing. Oh, it was the officer who said that. Okay. It was learned today that Reverend Legler's son had come from Hollister with Brandenburg last week. So they know each other well, and I guess that's already been, established that they attended Legler's church. Officers seem to be at a loss of what to do next. They can discover nothing that promises to lead to practical results. They go over the ground again and again in the hope of finding something on which to work, but it all seems in vain, unless someone who knows the secret of this cruel murder seems fit to betray it. There appears to be no way of penetrating the veil of mystery which surrounds it. The Superior Court today turned Shahamarian's property over to public administrator. It is valued at $1,800. And I think I read that little blurb from the newspaper. Okay, last article for Tuesday, June 9th, 1896. Fresno sleuths, this is the San Francisco Call-in Post. Fresno sleuths are baffled, fail to trace the slayer of the Shahamarian family. Clues lead to naught. Russians deny that they passed upon the fate of young Benjamin. Tale of the Brandenburgs. That's interesting. How women were insulted and children wronged by one of the victims. Okay, those are all little subtitles or subheadings. Fresno, California, June 8th. The assassin of Stephen Shahamarian, his son Benjamin, and daughter Queen is still at large. Though diligently at work, the authorities have been able to find no clue save the conviction that the Armenians were the victims of Russian rage, invoked by the younger Shahamarians' insults to Russian matrons and maids. A call correspondent today visited the home of Albert Brandenburg, the Russian German whose wife and little daughter had been insulted by Benjamin Shahamarian, and whose name has been connected with the crime. Mr. Brandenburg lives in Rooshian Town, just across the road from the home of the murdered Shahamarians. Mrs. Brandenburg did most of the talking to the interpreter who accompanied the correspondent. Both were eager to tell anything they knew and appeared as deeply mystified as anyone as to the identity of the murderer. The Brandenburgs said they have lived as neighbors to the Shahamarians for 6 or 7 years, and their relations had always been pleasant. Only a few days before the murder, Queen Shahamarian, the daughter, came over to Mrs. Brandenburg and asked her to assist in making a dress. Recently, however, they became unfriendly to the Shahamarian boy. On the night of the murder, Brandenburg and his children retired at about 8 o'clock. His wife followed an hour later. Neither Mr. nor Mrs. Brandenburg heard any noise from the Shahamarian cottage during the night, although it was only 80 feet distance from their place. On the evening before, they had seen the Shahamarian family and young Daniel Shahamarian sitting on the front porch of the cottage. Queen Shahamarian had been a frequent visitor at Brandenburg's home. She had told Brandenburg that she had been engaged to young Shahamarian, but her father objected on the grounds of relationship, they being cousins. Shahamarian continued to visit his uncle's house, and the attachment between him and Queen did not cease. The Brandenburgs say that the Shahamarians frequently quarreled with each other and were mentally unbalanced. Queen, the girl, would stand at windows and go through strange antics. Mrs. Brandenburg then told of the strange actions of Benjamin Shahamarian. His treatment of the little 3-year-old girl of Brandenburg, as described by the mother, was shocking. Mrs. Brandenburg also told with old country simplicity of the insults which the young youth had offered her on Friday afternoon. At this point of the tale, Brandenburg laughed and did not show any evidence of the anger which would have prompted a man to murder, for be it known that Brandenburg is under a sort of suspicion. Mrs. Brandenburg had gone before Justice Austin and swore to a complaint against Benjamin Shahamarian, but as the only evidence against him was the statements of 2 little girls, and as the boy flatly denied his guilt, the court dismissed charges. A warrant was then issued for his arrest on another charge. Upon investigation by Deputy Constable Pickford, no conclusive evidence could be obtained, and this case was also dismissed. Brandenburger stated that when he returned home and was appraised of young Shahamarian's crimes, he decided upon renewing the case in court. It was the proper manner to have the boy punished, he said. Mr. and Mrs. Brandenburg denied any knowledge of meetings held in Rooshian Town to decide upon what punishment should be meted to the youth and for his conduct. The meeting held in the church on Friday night, which was reported to be a gathering of Russians to consider Benjamin Shahamarian's actions, was a religious affair, according to the statements of the Russians. These meetings are similar to prayer meetings and are held almost nightly. Mr. Brandenburg is a teacher in the Sunday school of the church. When asked their opinion as to the identity of the murderer, Mr. and Mrs. Brandenburg shrugged their shoulders and replied that they did not know. The only enemies of the Armenian family, to their knowledge, were two Armenians. Okay, so because of time, I'm going to stop for today. I was hoping this would only be 5 episodes, but it looks like it's going to be 6 and then maybe 7. Of course, hopefully those will be a little bit shorter. But if you're still listening to this, it's because you're interested. So hopefully I'm not torturing you by, dragging this one out. But I've really enjoyed it, and I have some theories of my own about what I think happened, and based on the information that's here. And so I'll share those with you next time. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to the Germans from Russia experience. I hope that something you heard today will inspire you to dig into newspapers and find out about your own ancestors. If you like what you heard, please leave a review, like, and share this podcast. If you comment directly by emailing me at thegermansfromrussiaexp@gmail.com. Also, like my Facebook page, The Germans from Russia Experience Podcast. Please see my show notes and website suggestions to begin or continue your discovery of your Germans from Russia roots and about this episode. My podcast artwork is by Matt Wall. I receive technical assistance from my friend Annie Anderson.